Hi kids, welcome to our back patio. This is Holy Cross Kids and I am your host, Mrs. Clemmer. And today we are having our annual tradition of burning the Clemmer Christmas tree on Memorial Day. What do you think is going to happen when Mr. Clemmer lights the Christmas tree on fire?
It's gonna burn up.
It's gonna burn up. Well, today's story is about a man who found a bush that was on fire, but it didn't burn up. Would you like to hear it? If setting a bush on fire and having it not burn up sounds impossible, remember who we're learning about. Is there anything God cannot do? God can do all things according to his character. Because God is all powerful and all good, we can trust him to always do what is best. Nothing can stop him from doing his perfect plans. All right, kids, I want you to tell someone, either a sibling who's watching this with you or a grown-up, about the biggest or most important thing you've ever been asked to do. Who assigned it to you? Was it hard to do or was it easy to complete? When we are asked to do important things, it can feel exciting, but also a little bit scary, right? It's nice to feel important, but it can be hard to know that you're responsible for something really big. Today's story is about a man named Moses, and God chose Moses for a very big and important job. The Bible is a special book because it is true. It's given to us by God to know him and to see how he has been working through history to accomplish his purposes. For the last few months, we've been hearing stories from the book of Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. In Genesis, we learned that God is our creator and our king. We saw that God created everything and that everything God created was good. We saw that God created people in his image and he loves us. We saw how we rebelled against God and how our rebellion broke the world and how God promised to make the world right again and to bring us back into relationship with him. We've learned that we can trust God because he is faithful and he does everything for his glory and our good. We saw how he called Abraham and made a covenant with him, a promise to him to rescue the world through his family. We've heard stories about the family of Abraham, how they didn't keep their side of the covenant, but God was faithful and he kept his. And that was true for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God always keeps his promises because he is faithful. We've been learning that God can do all things according to his character. Now that we have finished the book of Genesis, we're moving on to the book of Exodus. Exodus is the second book of the Bible. In Exodus, we're going to hear about what happens to Joseph's family after they've lived in Egypt for a long time and grown to be a numerous people. Long after Joseph's life was over, his family stayed in Egypt. They were known as Israelites because, remember, God had given Jacob the name Israel, and they came from the family of Jacob, or Israel. A new Pharaoh came to power, and he was afraid of the Israelites. The family had grown so big, Pharaoh worried they would join Egypt's enemies and fight against him. Pharaoh made the Israelites slaves and gave them very hard work to do, but their families kept growing. Pharaoh ordered for all their baby boys to be killed. Around this time, a woman gave birth to a son. She hid him as long as she could, and then she put him in a basket and set it along the banks of the Nile River. The baby's older sister, Miriam, stayed nearby and watched the basket. Soon, Pharaoh's daughter went to the river to take a bath. She found the basket and saw the crying baby. Pharaoh's daughter felt sorry for the baby and wanted him to be her son. The princess named the baby Moses. When Moses grew up, he saw an Egyptian man beating up an Israelite man. In his anger, Moses did something rash and had to flee Egypt. He worked as a shepherd in Midian for many years. Moses got married and had a family. Still, the Israelite people in Egypt were miserable, and they cried out to God. God heard them, and he planned to help them. One day, Moses saw a burning bush. The bush was not burning up. Suddenly, God called from the bush,
Moses! Moses!
Here I am.
God told Moses to take off his sandals because Moses was standing on holy ground. Then God said,
I have seen how my people are suffering. I want you to lead them out of Egypt to a good land I have for them.
Moses wondered if the Israelites even remembered God.
What if they ask for your name? What should I tell them?
I am who I am.
God said.
Tell them, I am has sent me to you.
What if they don't believe me?
So God gave Moses 3 miraculous signs to prove that God had appeared to him. Moses' staff would turn into a snake, his hand would become diseased and then healed, and water from the river would turn into blood. Moses still made excuses and asked,
Please send someone else.
Now God was angry, but he agreed to send Moses' brother Aaron with him. So Moses went to Egypt. Many times we have seen God use hard situations to bless his people and to glorify himself. Pharaoh feared that Israel would become stronger than Egypt. Pharaoh began to make laws to hurt the Israelites and keep their families from growing. He made God's people serve as slaves, and he killed their children. But even through all of those horrible things, I want you to remember this, that God was with his people. He did not forget the promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When the Israelites cried out to God, he heard them and he set the next stage of his plan in motion. Moses' mother knew that God did not want Pharaoh to kill any babies, and so she hid Moses. She placed him in a basket that she had waterproofed. She trusted God to rescue her son, and God did just that. God had plans for Moses. When Moses grew up and left Egypt, he probably thought he would never return. But God called Moses to deliver his people from captivity. Moses tried to get out of it at first, claiming that he couldn't speak well. I don't know if any of you have trouble speaking well, but sometimes I have trouble getting the thoughts from my brain to my mouth and then expressing them clearly. Moses said, I'm slow of speech. Maybe he had a similar problem, or maybe he stuttered. We don't really know, but he had this reason he thought that he couldn't obey God and couldn't serve God. But God showed Moses that it wasn't about him, that it was about God. God had this incredible power, and he told Moses, my plans don't rely on you. It relies on me. God's plans rely only on God and God's power. He said his name is I am who I say I am, which tells us that God is unchanging and he always exists. Is there anything that God cannot do? God can do all things according to his character. One of the things that we need to be asking ourselves whenever we come to the Bible is, how does this point to Jesus? So, how do you think this part of our story points to Jesus? Is there any way that you see? You can pause the video if you want to talk with whoever you're with about how do we see Jesus in this story. Did you come up with anything? Okay, here's one idea, one thought. So we saw God save Moses' life and rescue him, and then he said, I'm calling you to rescue the Israelites from slavery. So this whole thing about calling and rescuing people points to a greater call and a greater rescue, right? The call of Jesus to come to earth to save God's people. Jesus gave up his life to save us from our slavery to sin. Moses, he resisted God's plan, right? He made all sorts of excuses, but God used him to save his people. Jesus, by contrast, when he heard God's plan, when he heard God's call, he willingly obeyed God's plans. So that's how I see Jesus in this story, in this particular part of Moses' life. Maybe you saw some others. I'd love to hear them. Thank you for joining me today to hear the story of how Moses was born and called. I'm so glad that you were here. If you are in my Holy Cross Kids C class, you know what I'm going to tell you now. Go get your Bible, turn to Exodus chapter 1, and read through chapter 4. This is the start of a very exciting chapter or portion of God's salvation story, of the big rescue. So I want you to go read it for yourself. On all of you, I want you to be thinking about these questions. I gave them to you last week, so they're going to sound a little bit familiar, but here they are again. What does this story teach me about God or the gospel? We talked a little bit about how we see Jesus in this story, but I want you to be thinking about, what does this teach you about God's character? And then the next question I want you to think about is, what does it teach you about yourself? Sometimes it's a little bit more obvious, sometimes it's not, but just think and ask God's Spirit to show you. And then the third question is, ask yourself, who can I tell about this story? Who can I share this with? That's all from me, guys. Look forward to seeing you another week. Bye.